great to see the interest in these programs because I think they really are valuable tools when you're trying to review those wetland permits, and especially if you're not able to physically get on the ground, because sometimes that's not always an option for commissioners. So it can be a challenge. And you can certainly gain a lot of information from the tools and data in the wetland. The land management, it's a long, you need a shorter name for the tool, the land management assessment tool. All right, so we have a few more people coming in. And I'll wait one more minute so we can start right at noon. And I'm also going to make you the co-host. And if you, that way you can also admit people if you notice they're hanging out in the waiting room for too long.
Great.
So,
is there, I'm sorry to interrupt, Barbara, is there
yeah,
a way to also make Kira a co-host?
absolutely. Let me jump in and make Kara a co-host as well. It's such a long list. I'm having trouble finding her. Oh, there she is. Okay. Great. Okay. You're both officially co-hosts. So, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the GIS Tools Wetland Assessment Part 2. My name is Barbara Richter, and I'm the Executive Director at the New Hampshire Association of Conservation Commissions. And NHACC is a nonprofit organization working to support commissions so that they can be successful in protecting their local natural resources. And a few quick reminders before we begin the program. So we are recording this program, and I will send the link to everybody who registered, but feel free to share this with your other commission members as well. Even if they didn't register, they're welcome to view this program. And then by next week, I'll have this on our YouTube channel and I'll send that link out as well. We do ask everybody to remain muted for the majority of the program. We are going to invite everybody to ask questions. So there'll be some interaction and you can unmute at that time, but during the presentations, just try to stay muted so everybody can hear. And a reminder that next Friday, September 26th, is the field study portion of this program, and we'll be going to Lock Road in Concord, which has a nice variety of different wetlands, so you get a chance to see the benefits and functions and values of floodplains, wetlands, scrub wetlands, and there's a great variety out there. So it'll be fun to check that out next Friday. So today we have two special guests from New Hampshire DES to show us how to harness the online tools to gather data to assess wetlands functions and values. So Emma Berger is the Inland Wetland Permitting Section Supervisor at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. With more than 8 years of experience in wetland permitting, Emma brings technical knowledge and regulatory insight to her role and in the workshops she participates in. In addition to her work at New Hampshire DES, Emma is passionate about education and mentorship. She has experience as an adjunct professor, where she's taught courses related to wetland science and environmental policy, helping to inspire and prepare the next generation of environmental professionals. We also have Cara Vallone here today. She is a permitting specialist with the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Wetlands Bureau, focusing on the central region of New Hampshire. Cara has 10 years of experience in environmental science and biology, having previously worked as a contractor for the National Marine Fisheries Service and a biological technician with the New Hampshire Fish and Game. Kara's currently working towards her professional wetland scientist and certified wetland scientist certifications and is a member of the National Association of Wetland Managers. So welcome to Kara and Emma. I'm going to go ahead and pass the program over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Barbara. We're going to start the presentation with a brief background. Kara, are you able to share your screen? Looks like she's working on it. One moment.
Sorry, working on it. Give me one sec.
Let me know if you want me to take over.
Yeah, I can't seem to get, once I'm in the presentation mode, it makes the Zoom go away.
No problem. I can take over here.
Sorry about that.
No need to apologize. Thank you for your patience. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Looks good.
Right, great. Thank you everyone for joining us for part 2 of GIS tools for wetland assessment. We're so excited to be here to speak on this topic. Again, my name is Emma Berger. I'm the Inland Wetland Section Supervisor. I'm going to cover just a very small portion of today's workshop, and then Kara Vallone is going to take over. The objective here is to assess wetland functions through desktop evaluation, and for you to gain a confidence in navigating the LRM permit planning tool for desktop analysis for potential wetland functions. This is an interactive workshop, so I do recommend, for that reason, closing out of other things that may be open in your browser, maybe putting your phone on mute and pushing it away from yourself, because we will be stopping frequently, asking questions, engaging with you. I love to see people utilizing the chat function in Zoom, as well as unmuting themselves to answer questions. The more you engage with us, the more interesting this presentation is. There is also the exercise worksheet that accompanies this workshop. I did put it in the chat, so if you did not receive it via email, it's available in the Zoom chat. If you need help, let us know. This outline is very similar to last week. Last week, I covered what the NHDES's wetlands role is and what avoidance and minimization is when we are assessing criteria and permits. I'm going to do a brief recap of the functions and values that we discussed last week and how this pertains to you as a commissioner. And then we're going to jump in, and by we, I mean Kara. She's going to speak on the topic of wildlife habitat, fish and shellfish habitat, and threatened and endangered species. There will be an exercise associated with each of those functions and values as well. And just so that we can recap on what we're regulating here, anytime someone is impacting a soil, that means disturbing the wetland soil, a permit is required in the Wetlands Bureau. And when we say things like avoidance and minimization, we discussed last week that this means more than the impact footprint, but also the impacts to wetland functions. I provided an example of a project plan that the department could receive. We talked about how if someone was proposing a driveway, we would have to assess not just the footprint of impacts, but the impacts to those wetland functions and values. And in this example, we can see that there are impacts to the groundwater recharge, flood flow alteration, and nutrient retention, as opposed to impacts to just one function. And that's one of the aspects that the department has to review when it comes to assessing for avoidance and minimization, and something that you as a commissioner can look at when you receive a project plan using GIS tools to determine, did the consultant flag all of the principal functions and values based on my desktop analysis? And do I need to provide the department a comment on this? So I just really want to touch on this. I know that many of you have been doing this for a long time, but I would be remiss by not stating this. maybe for newer commissioners, or just connecting the aspect of why this really matters and why this is pertinent. As a commissioner, your advisory role when reviewing applications allows you the ability to comment on NHDES's wetland permit applications. But in order for you to do this effectively, it is so important that you understand what our role is, what we're regulating, and what the review criteria that NHDES is tasked with, meaning the avoidance and minimization. That is the keystone of our applications that we review. Without that aspect, NHDES may not approve an application. So taking this understanding of our review criteria and connecting it to identifying wetland features that may or may not have been identified in application allows you the ability to make informed comments. So that was the fundamental point I wanted to make last week, and I just really wanted to hit on the purpose and intent of that. Again, the applicant is tasked with demonstrating avoidance minimization. Your role, you can provide recommendations to NHDES, and any comments that you provide to the Wetlands Bureau in the permitting process, NHDES by statute must make detailed findings referencing that. So this is how it connects to GIS. This is why it's important. You can use GIS tools to predict the impact to wetland functions. So last week there was a lot of connecting different types of wetland functions that is used in the GIS tools, because that's how you can assess for avoidance and minimization and provide comments or recommendations. We spoke a lot about predicting water movement, predicting if there's a presence of wetlands and what those wetland functions may be. And the takeaway was you want to consider elevation changes. You want to consider if there are floodplains or streams within the vicinity that can provide some of those functions, such as flood storage, nutrient retention, nutrient transformation, etc. Here is a graphic to demonstrate the point that I'm making here, which is that here's Lock Road. If you have an upstream area that's flowing, let's say you have an ephemeral stream, the water goes into the marsh, and just from the ability of that water flowing and collecting with the right type of soils can allow for the potential of a wetland. And those wetlands come with habitat. So last week I spoke briefly on this, the critical wildlife habitat that wetlands can provide. And again, that's the main focus of today, is being able to determine if there is supporting landscape for wildlife habitat and what type of wildlife habitat you may expect. With that, I'm going to let Kara Vallone take it away. Thank you.
Sorry, trying to find the unmute button. Okay. So as Emma just said, we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about wildlife and how to assess if there is wildlife habitat in the area that's proposed for impacts. So we're going to talk about wildlife habitat in general, seeing if it's a suitable area for wildlife. It has breeding habitat, nesting habitat, feeding, and cover, which are all important portions of a species. And then fish and shellfish habitat. We have some tools where we can show where those fish and shellfish have been recorded. It's important for us to know where those would be in relation to projects. And we'll look for habitats for fish, shellfish, and other aquatic organisms. And they typically are in open water wetlands or stream systems. And then we'll talk about threatened and endangered species and different layers that we can use to predict where those might be. And rare and threatened and endangered species are important parts of habitat. Okay, so we're looking to see if the habitat has enough breeding, nesting, feeding, and habitat cover, both for resident species and migratory species, especially birds. So from aerial imagery, using our GIS tools like the LRMPPT or Google Earth, we can assess overhead views of how wildlife habitat is intact or maybe degraded. So on the left, we have a wetland complex that is protected by a 730-acre forest. It's in a conservation easement, and as you see, there's no development nearby that could impact these systems. And so we would expect there to be quite a bit of diversity in wildlife in an area like this with different habitat types and very little impacts around the area. On the right, we see a degraded wetland. It is surrounded by a development on one side and then a roadway. And then on the other side, there's another roadway. And so the vicinity of the development can play a really big role in the functions and values that a habitat can offer to wildlife. So high functioning wildlife habitat has a couple components. Rare species can make up that portion of the habitat. Riffle pool complexes and streams, those are important for aquatic species, especially fish, because when they're migrating upstream or trying to breed, the pool complex within the stream allows them to rest a little bit, and then the riffle is where they have better chances of feeding and hiding from predators. For food, obviously, you know, everything needs food to survive. You also need shelter and water so that you are protected from predators and maybe you can raise your young underneath some cover. And then trees and shrubs along the waterway edges do provide both food and shelter and nesting habitat. So this is an overview of Lock Road, where we're going to go next week, that you guys talked about last week. So what kinds of potential wildlife would you expect to see in this location? Nancy said birds. Yep. Why birds? Do we have an idea of why we might see lots of birds here? Because of a tree cover. Yep. So this area, you guys talked about last week, and I'm sure you've seen quite a few photos of so far. But there is a silver maple floodplain here, and there's a scrub shrub wetland with some emergent sections in here. And there's a little stream that comes down this way. So the birds would love the scrub shrub wetland. Some of the bird species also like emergent wetlands, like, oh, what is the bird I'm thinking of? Red wings blackbird. They like marshes. So you would expect to see those here. In the river area, you might see some herons on the sandy beaches trying to catch some fish. Yeah. Anything else we might see here?
Looks like beaver, woodcock.
Yeah. Wildlife species that prey on smaller animals. Yep. We definitely see those along the tree edges where the scrub shrub wetland meets the forested areas. We'll see eagles sometimes along the river that are hanging out to try to catch fish. On the coastal areas, you might see osprey doing the same thing. And then eagles also really like, and hawks really like small mammals that like to hide in the scrub shrub wetlands. Turtles and amphibians definitely are big users of scrub shrub wetlands. Okay, so when we're looking at a site, it's important to consider if the wetland is contiguous with another system. That's because, you know, here we have a scrub shrub wetland. It is connected to a forested wetland. It's also connected to the Merrimack River and a small stream system here. So with all those connections, you will see higher diversity of wildlife using these areas. And, you know, if you have the surface water here that's connected all the way to the Merrimack River, and you see a fish in this stream, it's likely that you might see that fish in the Merrimack River as well because they're connected systems. Another thing to ask yourself, is there wildlife access to other wetlands that are not contiguous? So, this is more of a thing to consider for our land animals or flighted animals. Can they access another wetland from this wetland complex? So here we have the 93 corridor, which kind of limits their ability to traverse. But for birds, that's obviously not a problem. So we would probably see more birds than we would see terrestrial things crossing this 93 corridor. And then we have to consider if there's food sources nearby and if there's dense vegetation, and those tend to go hand in hand when we're talking about wildlife. So considering the habitat within the entire landscape, things to consider are fragmentation from development. If it's surrounded by development on both sides or it bisects it, the wildlife will have a harder time using both wetlands or, the whole complex in order to meet their needs. A good criteria for wildlife habitat is if the upland surrounding area is undeveloped. That gives them room to grow their populations, do their regular predation, breeding activities, that kind of thing, raising their young. And if 40% or more of the wetland edge is bordered by upland habitat, at least 500 feet wide, it's considered good wildlife habitat. And the density of vegetation is high. So here, we're looking at another overview of Lock Road. And so again, some things to consider is what the surrounding landscape looks like. So within the purple rectangles, we have different land uses. So to the far left, there's an agricultural field that is just along the Merrimack River. Between that and the river is a silver maple floodplain and a sandy beach where sediment's being deposited. In the middle, we have a shrub marsh wetland with densely vegetated areas and some open water areas. And it's surrounded by woody vegetation. So in the shrub section, we would expect to see high species diversity because of the diverse areas with the open water. There's some shrub plants, and then it's surrounded by forested areas. And then over to the right, we have a section of developed commercial properties and roadways. And if you actually turned on the NWI, there are a couple of pocket wetlands in that area. But in terms of functions and values, the functions of those wetlands would be much more degraded than the left two wetland complexes due to the vicinity of the development. So here we have an overview of Lock Road again with our wildlife action plan layers and the NWI, the wetlands inventory layers turned on. So on the left, we have, you can see in the pink, there's some shrub wetlands in the middle there, and then the river and the riparian corridor kind of covers the majority of both of those. And so we would expect here to see lots of turtles and amphibians using this area to traverse between the river and the floodplain area and the shrub marsh. And over on the right, you can just see the overview of the extent of the wetlands and the floodplains of the river. So again, here we have another layer. This is the designated rivers layer with the blue in the middle here. The Merrimack River is a designated river. We also have the wetlands inventory turned on, also showing the shrub wetlands. And then the orange blocks are terrestrial corridors. So that's where we would expect to see, our four-legged creatures or our avian animals using those habitat blocks. And so the areas where they're connected are areas where there's the easiest route for migration through those areas. So this slide I just wanted to touch on because the Wildlife Action Plan actually does specific areas. So I know you all are from conservation commissions. So you can actually look up your Wildlife Action Plan for your specific town. And they're also listed in spreadsheet form if you'd rather have the data itself. But this is for the Concord area. and it's showing the highest ranked habitat in New Hampshire and the habitat in the biological region. And the highest ranked habitat in New Hampshire is the top 15 highest quality habitats in the state. So the pink areas. Okay, so another thing to look at is areas for avian utilization or potential. This is part of the assessment for wildlife habitat. So when we're looking at this, it depends on the type of bird we're talking about. They all have different habitat needs based on their feeding habits and their nesting habits. So if we're talking about waterfowl, such as ducks, geese, those kinds of things, we're talking about lakes and ponds. They like open water where they can catch some fish, they might catch shrimp. They want something open and they can bring their babies out on the water. If we're talking about songbirds, we're mostly talking about riparian corridors, dense forests, and scrub shrub wetlands. Songbirds really like the scrub shrub wetlands because they're very dense vegetation and they can put their nests in there and they'll be protected from predators in that area. Shorebirds love sandy beaches and marshes. A lot of them will have really long legs, like the heron in the photo to the left. That's actually a photo of a heron rookery up in Dalton. They love sandy beaches and marshes. They also love freshwater. So we see those a lot at ponds and lakes and rivers. And you'll see them just wading in the water trying to catch some fish. And then we'll see a lot of high diversity where ecosystems converge. So, where we were just talking about Lock Road, it has multiple different systems. It has scrub shrub, it has emergent wetlands, it has forested wetlands. You're going to see a lot of diversity in those areas because you have different animals that require those different types of ecosystems. So this is the NWI layer showing those scrub shrub wetlands. It also shows that there's some emergent sections in here. And so we would expect, as I was just saying, lots of birds to be within this area and along the Merrimack River. Okay, so wanted to touch on the Wildlife Action Plan. So the Wildlife Action Plan is for conserving the species of greatest conservation need and their habitats. In the state of New Hampshire, it identifies 169 of these species of greatest conservation need and 27 supporting habitats for those species. And each of these species has a profile that includes information about their population, threats they may be facing, and any conservation actions that they may be under, such as, if they're a threatened species or something, and plans to conserve them. All right, so important things to consider for wildlife habitat. If it would be a good habitat for wildlife, more than 3 acres of shallow, open, permanent water. That's important for finfish specifically, and also for our raptor species or bird species that love fish. The potential for large amphibian populations. Amphibians bring in lots of other things. Amphibians are attracted to insects, and the insects will attract fish. And so it kind of has a cascade effect where one thing will bring in another thing. Oh, there's a question. What was the name of the last layer that you referenced? So we're talking about the Wildlife Action Plan. So I think on the last slide, we were just talking about it in general. The one before that, we were talking about the NWI layer, which is the National Wetlands Inventory. So this one here, which would be under the resource planning layers if you were to scroll up a little bit. So you have to turn that one on first, and then you scroll down to National Wetlands Inventory and turn that guy on. And then you turn on the wetlands types, and it will show you all of the different wetlands that are present in that area.
And just to add to that, we're going to demo that in just a moment, and you will get to practice it. So pay attention.
Okay, so, and the high avian utilization or potential, which we just discussed based on the different types of habitats. and contains or has the potential to contain large populations of amphibians. We talked about that a little bit, and insects as well. So this is the wildlife action plan layer here. So it's showing that the highest ranked habitat runs right through this shrub wetland. So we would expect to see a high level of species diversity in that shrub wetland.
All right, so I'm going to take it over here to discuss the demo. This is exercise 1. Everyone should have a copy of the PDF to practice independently. I'm going to go through those steps with you in just a moment. It's a little fast, but please know you can ask questions once you jump into it independently and you need a little bit more direction. You may get this oops, let me go back. You may get this at first, just exit out. Be sure to click the agree. If you get this, ignore it. It'll still allow you to utilize the tool. You'll go into the address bar and you will type Lock Road, Concord, New Hampshire. Press enter. It will take you to the site of interest. Then you're going to navigate over to the wetland layer list. Oh, apologies. You're going to navigate first to the base map. You'll scroll down and go to imagery hybrid to change the base map, just to show you that there's different types of base maps that you can use. You can also zoom out, zoom in to your preference, and you can pan the screen by clicking enter or by using your mouse to click and move around. You'll navigate to the wetlands layer list. You can turn off the base layer. After that point, you will be asked to navigate down to the resource planning layers. You'll expand that by clicking the arrow. You'll be asked to click into the National Wetlands Inventory to expand that list. Select wetland types to access that layer Kara referenced. You can view the legend by clicking here. It'll expand so you have a key, and you can make that transparent as much as you'd like. After which you will be asked to, after you click X out of here, you'll be asked to navigate to another layer. Let's see. The Wildlife Action Plan layer. And you can click into that box. You'll click the arrow, scroll down, and you'll get to play around with a couple of these boxes here and see how it changes in your map view. You'll have about 5 minutes, maybe 10, depending on if you need help or additional assistance. And once you're finished, we'll come back together as a group and we'll talk about these 3 questions. All set? All right, great. It's 12:32 now. You have until 12:37.
So there is a question, if you could please walk through those steps again.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So there's a step-by-step in the PDF document as well. So it's a little bit of a brief overview with the intent to just show you what's ahead of you. But you're gonna click the I agree, you'll click OK, you'll enter the address at the top right corner of the screen. You will type Lock Road Concord. So all of these directions are in that PDF document. You'll press enter. After you press enter, you will change the base map, which is in the top right corner here. You'll scroll down to imagery hybrid. You'll select that. Then you can change by clicking zoom out or pan the screen. That is to show you that you can modify your view using those options there. Then you will navigate to the wetlands layer list, click the base, check that box for base layers. Then you're going to navigate down to the resource planning layers. You'll click the down arrow to expand your options. You'll select National Wetlands Inventory, click the down arrow, and then you will check the box for wetland types to view the different types of wetlands that Kara shared earlier and why that's pertinent to the function, and to assess if that would be potentially a principal function. Then you're going to navigate to transparency settings to show you that you have this tool available to you. After that, you'll close out, you'll click that X button. And then you'll navigate to the Wildlife Action Plan and play around with those layers. You'll click that checkbox, click the arrow, and then you'll get to click those check boxes and see how it changes on your screen. So go ahead, try it on your own. The link is at the very top of the document. You'll click that. You'll follow the steps. There are screenshots in the PDF telling you what it should look like as well once you follow the directions. And if you get stuck on anything, let me know. I'll share my screen of the permit planning tool and we'll see if we can work it out together as a group. So it's 12:35. I'll give you all about until 12:40, and then I'll check and see how you're doing with the exercise.
So there's a question for these questions. What parcel are we evaluating? Lock or West Lock Road? I think we're looking at that section.
Yeah,
North?
that's a good
Yeah.
question. it can be up to you which side you want to look at. I think we've been looking more in the area between, so I'm going to share my screen that we've been discussing. Let me turn off some of these layers here.
Yeah, I find it challenging when you have a lot of layers on. It's a challenge to kind of sort through that information.
Yes, that's the thing about the tool. You have a lot of information available, but it can make it more complicated to navigate. And, the purpose of the exercise here is to really get over that learning curve. I think maybe it was Chris or Cody in the chat that recommended take it step by step, take it slow, because it can be overwhelming. But once you get over that learning curve, it makes a lot of sense. And the intent of the exercise is to try and get a little bit more comfortable utilizing the tool. And as Barbara said, play around with it, see what this looks like. So we've got 2 points that pull up when you press enter. We've really been focusing our attention in the middle. And what I really want you all to be able to do is to just kind of assess, see what's jumping out at you along Lock Road here. I hope that answers your question. Is there another thing you'd like me to demo here now that I think we're kind of coming back together as a group here?
The other question was, will you be covering how to format, sorry about that, format a PDF file that can be used in a report?
So I think my question is to this, if I'm understanding correctly, are you asking, is there a way to turn this into a map that you can use? Is that the question? Can you turn it into a map? Or are you
I
asking?
think, if you wanted to share this with someone who's not online with you and you want to put it in, even, attach it to an email or print it out and discuss it at a meeting, how do you turn this into a PDF?
There's a few tools that you can use here, but I think the most straightforward one is you go up to the top of your screen, it says tools. There's a few extra features here that you can utilize. And you'll notice there's one option here for print. You'll go to print, and there's a few different templates that you can select from. So I always recommend doing landscape when you're doing a map, and there's a few different formats. I'm more of a fan of this format, but you can use any of them. That's a preference. You can change the title of your map. You can type out Lock Road, for example, and then it gives you the option of what type of format you want this file to be in. PDF makes a lot of sense. There's the option for advanced. If you select current map scale, it'll keep it to the level that you're zoomed out. You can even type the name of who is generating the map here. You can include a legend, the north arrow, and this is going to show you the extent of what you're printing here, this blue shaded area. So as I zoom out, you can see that the scale changes. And then you'd select print. Once you select print, this is a little misleading for me. It took me a few times to figure this out, but just to point it out so that you don't have to figure it out on your own. You'll see up here in the results, there's a loading screen, and it can take a while to generate the map. It can take a few minutes. So you'll see it's still loading, it's still generating. But once that's finished, then you'll be able to click into a hyperlink and save it. Does that capture your question here?
I think that was a great explanation, and it is, again, those tools are pretty available if you notice which button to press. The only other question we had was, can you use a Windows snipping tool that allows you to select only the portion? And that does make sense, but you don't always get the legend or, some of those other details that you may want to include.
Yeah, you do miss out on the legend, but I certainly have seen people use the snipping tool. It's faster. It can be a little bit easier to manipulate. I'm a fan of Snippet. I don't know if you've heard of Snippet before. I have it on my desktop here. I can demo what that might look like if you're interested in using that. You would open up your snipping tool. That's the name of it, snipping tool. Select new. And let's say that I wanted to capture this area here with the scrub shrub. And just draw to the area of the extent. It automatically copies. And then you can put it into a Word document and turn that into a PDF. So for example, I just took that snippet and I just put it in the chat. You can share it with other people in your communications and in email, Outlook, whatever you need it for.
And on that too, if you have the wetlands layer list open and you have layers turned on, you can include as much as you possibly can in your snipping tool that way. So it's not like a full legend, but if you don't have a ton of layers on, you can snip the legend on the left as well, the layer list.
And I have a question from kind of the beginning of the program. How much do we need to provide comments if DES is using the same tool to make decisions?
That's a great question. I was anticipating that one. I was hoping someone would ask that. So thank you, Barbara. I think that it is always helpful for the Conservation Commission when they are reviewing. So ordinarily the Conservation Commission, they're providing comments typically hopefully within that 14-day period, or they may request an extension before DES renders a decision. And if something's jumping out to the commission, I think it's important to point that out, to make those comments. I do find sometimes that conservation commissions will just defer to NHDES, but if something is jumping out at you as the Conservation Commission and it is a concern and you're finding it using this GIS tool, I think it's valid to point that out and to ask for more information. If you think that there's a concern to be had based on the information as presented. And then NHDES, when we ask the applicant to address those comments, if they haven't already, then they should be thoroughly addressing those questions to demonstrate avoidance and minimization. Because again, we cannot approve an application unless that has been demonstrated. And the department must make findings referencing how the applicant has addressed any comments and how they've achieved avoidance and minimization.
So another question came in our Concom, we're boots on the ground. Even with the constant updates to the data layers, New Hampshire DES may not have the most recent data, know the history of the site or the persons involved. And I think really this is great information, but ground truthing it is really important. It can be a challenge though to get on every property, and that's why these tools can be helpful. But absolutely, if you can get out there on the ground, we always recommend that because you may see some, things that raise questions that you wouldn't find in just these overall maps.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing to keep in mind is these layers are not all inclusive. So the NWI layer shows what's been documented on a federal level, but it doesn't include all of the wetlands that could possibly be there. And I know that I have had Concoms catch wetlands that were not covered on the NWI, and the wetland scientist on the project didn't delineate a wetland that was there. And the Concom had known the history of the site, and they caught that there was a large wetland that was removed or impacted.
So that's part of the advisory role of the commission, right? You can provide those comments to NHDES, and that's why I always try to include it every time I present to commissioners in opportunities like this. I really want the commission to understand their role and how that interacts in our permitting process. I know many of you probably already understand this, but I just think it's so important that we all are on the same level of understanding. So with that, let's move to the questions associated with the exercise here. First question was, what type of vegetative habitats are likely located here? And I'll tag Kara in to interact with you all, but this question is for the participants online. So go ahead, take it away, Kara.
So for vegetative, did you want me to ask them or do you want me to tell them?
I already asked it.
Okay.
I did this in a very confusing way. This is for the commissioners on the line to answer.
What do we think kind of habitats are here? So we have somebody, Brianna says, freshwater forested and scrub wetlands. Yep. And that's in the pink layer. And freshwater emergent wetlands, which is in the orange layer. Yep, and floodplain forest. That doesn't always show up on the NWI layer. We do have a floodplain wetland contiguous to a tier 3 stream layer that shows up, and that's under the priority resource areas. And the wildlife action plan. Yep. All right. What is the highest ranked wildlife habitat from the wildlife action plan? Second highest wildlife habitat. Very nice. And highest ranked. Yep, we've got a little of both in there. All right, and do we think that this site is suitable to support wildlife, including breeding, nesting, feeding, and cover for resident and migratory species? And why do we think that? Ooh, somebody just put a good thing in the chat. It actually does show the acreage of habitats if you click on them, which is really nice. Especially when we're assessing habitats. There was a portion of the habitat assessment where it says more than 3 acres of shallow or open water. So that would be a way you could assess that. All right, so we'll go into fish and shellfish habitat. So when we're assessing for fish and shellfish habitat, we're looking for the quality of the habitat for fish and shellfish and other aquatic organisms. And we typically look for them in open water wetlands and stream systems. So open water wetlands are going to include our scrub shrub marshes and our emergent wetlands. So here we have the fish and shellfish habitat where we can assess from the wildlife action plan layer. And the best layer for that under the wildlife action plan is going to be our riparian corridors. That's because where we see riparian corridors is typically going to have some kind of open water system. It's going to have either a riverine system or emergent wetlands or scrub shrub wetlands. And those tend to be associated with fish, amphibians, and high insect populations. Another layer we can use to assess whether fish or shellfish may be present is the watershed drainage area layer. So this will show the direction in which water flows. And the legend on the bottom kind of details what the watershed area size is. So the lighter layers are going to be small stream systems. Sometimes ephemeral streams will be included in the less than 100 acres for the watershed drainage. And then if you notice in the bottom left corner, the Merrimack River has a darker blue color because it has a much larger watershed. The larger watersheds are where we would typically predict for permanent open water systems for fish and shellfish to be present. You may see some in the middle tier as well, possibly in the smaller tier, but probably not as much because those are going to be more like runoff from storms and such. Or they may dry up like an intermittent stream, and fish are not going to be typically present in those. So the NWI layer is another great one for predicting fish and shellfish habitat, looking for those emergent wetlands in the orange and the scrub shrub wetlands in the pink. All right, so we've talked a lot about our LRM permit planning tool. This one is a different tool you can use to assess for fish specifically. This is only for finfish. It doesn't do any invertebrate species, but it is a really useful layer for presence and absence data. And so this is run by the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, and it shows red data points where there are documented fisheries of specific species. So these are all freshwater species that are native to New Hampshire or found in New Hampshire. And so if you click on each individual red dot, it will pop up with that data box, and it will detail which species that are present in New Hampshire were found in this system on that particular day. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the fish is not present in that system at all. There are limitations to the sampling, and that data box actually does show which type of sampling and the date it was conducted. So something important to keep in mind on this is the method of sampling is electrofishing, which essentially is stunning the fish to a point where they're immobilized but not hurt, so you can scoop them up and sample them. And so the box that's showing right now says e-boat. That means that the boat itself had this electrode in it and sometimes is less effective at collecting fish than if you were just doing an e-fishing method by hand with a backpack. Other things to keep in mind is deeper habitats are harder to do this type of sampling. If there are small crevices that a fish could hide in, they could not be immobilized by this sampling technique. And fast flows in the water can also, the fish may be immobilized, but maybe you can't catch it. So there's some sampling limitations here, but this is a great tool to see if there's presence of a specific species, especially if you're looking for, you know, something specific like American eel. So this is a little bit of an overview of how to use one of our other systems. This is the Stream Crossing Initiative Data Viewer, and it's just going to show you a little overview of how to do it. So on this one, you go to the left-hand side to type in the address, kind of opposite. So our legend is on the right-hand side on this tool. And so you can zoom out using your cursor or the in and out buttons on the left. And so here we're zooming into Lock Road, our subject parcel. Over on the left, it's showing any areas where there is a wetland or stream crossing. And you can also turn on different fish layers. This one doesn't have as many fish species as the fish mapping tool, but this one does focus on fish that are more species of concern. Another thing that's important on this layer is anywhere where there's a stream that has a culvert, you can turn on aquatic organism passage on these layers to see whether or not the culvert is sufficiently sized to allow for aquatic organism passage. So that's important because if you were, say, you know, trying to assess the area of West Lock Road and you were looking farther upstream, maybe across route the 93 corridor, if you see a culvert that would not pass aquatic organisms, you would likely not see those same fish species downstream of a culvert that couldn't pass aquatic organisms.
Could you explain that the culvert, you know, the key a bit?
Yeah. Give me 1 second. I didn't take a snapshot of that, so I just have to open the tool.
Are you
Bear with
putting
me.
a screenshot in the chat, Kara?
I can, yeah, absolutely.
So that tool, there's a link at the bottom of the exercise PDF that everyone has a copy of. The final exercise has you interact with that tool. It's by NHDES as well, but it does provide a little bit more information when it comes to threatened and endangered species and culvert information. So it's a good tool to have in your pocket.
Yes. It also will tell you if the culvert is geomorphically compatible with the system. It will tell you if that culvert has ever overtopped, meaning the water went over the top of the roadway. You can turn on survey photos, which not all of them have, but some of them will have an actual photo of the culvert. So there's a lot of good layers on this one as well. And I did drop in the chat the aquatic organism passage scores. So the culvert layers should be on automatically when you open the tool. The top, I think it's 4 or 5 layers are automatically selected when you open the tool. So if you're looking at a specific area and those don't pop up, either they're not selected for some reason or you don't have any culverts in the area that you're looking for.
So I have it paused on the screen that I'm sharing.
We are on a different tool now. We're on the Stream Crossing Initiative Data Viewer.
Right. So this is a different tool than the LRM permit planning tool. You have a link at the bottom of the PDF. You'll get an opportunity to practice in that as well. So I'll show you where to access this tool in a moment, but it's just an extra tool to have in your back pocket. So we'll go over that one a little bit before exercise 3. But when it comes to fish and shellfish habitat, just know there's a couple of little extra tricks that you can try to assess an area.
Yes, fish and shellfish specifically, less so shellfish, but the link I just put in the chat for the stream crossing data viewer and the fish mapper are really good ones for fish specifically if you're looking for those. And we'll go more into the fish mapper tool later on when we talk about T&E species.
Yep, so now we're segueing back to the LRM permit planning tool to wrap up predicting fish and shellfish habitat. You'll get to play around with this in a moment. Carol, I'll let you talk.
Okay, so this one, we're going back to the LRM permit planning tool here to predict shellfish and fish habitat. So what I'm doing here is just turning on the National Wetlands Inventory layer and turning on the wetland types. And here we see those emergent wetlands pop up, the shrub wetlands. We have a large designated river that would house fish populations. And then you can also select the wildlife action plan layers. And when you open that, it tends to have almost all of the layers turned on except for fisheries. So you have to unclick all of those unless you'd like to see them as well. And then you click fisheries and it will show you specific species. If you're looking for eastern brook trout, which is a species of concern, it would show you that top layer. It tends to show up in like a pink color. And then you can look for threatened and endangered species or cold water fishery. Okay, another thing to consider when we're assessing wildlife habitat is the water quality of the water. Are there impairments to the water course, pond, or lake? What type of impairments are present if there are any? And where are they in reference to the project location? So if you had a contamination upstream of the subject parcel or area, then you can expect if there's water flow that impairment will probably go into your wetland system that's in question for impacts. And then also things to consider for water quality: is there enough dissolved oxygen in the system for supporting those populations? Is the temperature, within an average normal range to support those populations? Is the pH close to neutral, or is it acidic or basic? Acidity tends to be a bigger problem than alkalinity. And then turbidity for certain species is a really big deal. A lot of the smaller fish and shellfish are very sensitive to turbidity, which is the clarity of the water, specifically in relation to sediment. Okay, so we have some examples of water quality. On the left is poor water quality. So here is a cyanobacteria bloom, which causes low dissolved oxygen and creates hypoxic or anoxic conditions. Hypoxia is low oxygen, anoxia is no oxygen, which can cause fish kills. Causes low pH and the water becomes acidic. Causes the temperature to increase, and in this case, with the cyanobacteria bloom, it is a harmful algae that produces toxins, and the toxins themselves, in addition to the other portions of the water that have been degraded, the toxins can kill the fish and other aquatic wildlife. And so on the right, we have an example of good water quality. There's likely high dissolved oxygen in this system. It's surrounded by vegetation, which not only provide that oxygen, but also help to remove any pollutants that may enter the system. This likely has a near neutral pH, and if not, it's probably on the more alkaline side. It probably has normal temperatures, drinkable water source for wildlife, and the nutrients in the water column are bioavailable, which tends to not happen in our hypoxic and anoxic conditions.
All right, so just to make that connection before you jump into this next exercise, the discussion on water quality, just to bring it to the forefront of your mind, is really the purpose of this next exercise. So Kara just walked you through if there are any potential impacts to water quality, there could be an impact to the presence of aquatic organisms. So this next exercise that I'm going to ask you all to try is to really utilize the different layers that could cue you in to potential water quality issues, and therefore if there is going to be supporting habitat for aquatic organisms. I hope that makes sense. So exercise 2, here's the demo. Watch carefully. This is what you're going to be asked to do on your own. You'll have about 5 minutes. This is a much shorter exercise to try. You're going to type in, so you should have this up on your screen. You should still be in the Lock Road area. If not, you're typing in Lock Road, Concord, New Hampshire, pressing enter. You may want to manipulate your base map. You're going to go to the wetland layer list. And then next, what you'll do is you'll expand these options by clicking that arrow in the resource planning tool. You'll select the National Wetland Inventory and the wetland types if it's not already selected. You're going to go to potentially contaminated sites here. It's under the resource planning layer. So you're going to select that, check that box. You'll click this arrow, and then you'll notice you'll want to scroll down. So you'll click this and move that bar to see your options here. You'll next be asked to check a series of things. First one will be environmental, oops. All right, excuse me. Next one will be the environmental monitoring sites. Then you'll be asked to select local potential contamination sources, then NPDES outfalls, remediation sites. These could point you in a direction of water quality. Then you'll scroll down, oops. Scroll down to impaired waters. You'll check the box, click the arrow, and then you'll select watersheds with chlorine, and then you will select surface waters with impairments with quarter-mile buffer. You'll be asked to then navigate to the legend. That's to increase your comfort in finding that legend key on your own. and you'll see that it gets highlighted here in the map. And that will conclude your exercise for this section. You'll have 5 minutes, so we'll stop at 1:13 and then come back as a group to answer the questions on our next slide. So Kara, do you want to address Nancy's comment in the chat?
Sure. So when we're talking about contamination, that contamination in the water is going to stay, dissolved in the water. So the 1/4 mile buffer is important because there could be a flood event that causes the river to overtop. It could get down into the aquifer and go into nearby systems. Any surface water connection or underground connection could impair that water body or wetland as well.
Great question. Thank you, Nancy. You have about another minute or so with this exercise. All right, so now you should be wrapping up. How did everyone feel about this exercise? A little bit shorter. Ashley asked a good question. Barbara, do you want to take that one?
So in order for towns to utilize layers such as the 1/4 mile buffer, do we need to adopt them or add them to our wetlands ordinance? And yes, in order to, in most cases, I should say, to protect your upland buffers, you would need a local townwide wetland ordinance that indicates which areas have those buffers or which water resources have buffers and the size of those buffers. In some cases, DES has 100-foot buffers for prime wetlands, but that's a specific time period that was covered. So really, to best protect your wetland buffers, you want to have a local ordinance to do that.
Thank you for answering that, Barbara. We had another question in the chat from Paul about finding the drainage area. I am sharing my screen right now. So under the wetlands layer list, you'll want to scroll down, and it's at the very bottom of my screen here. So you'll want to make sure that you've got the resource planning layer selected. I'm going to turn off all these other layers so that you can just see my watershed layer to know what you should be seeing. This is it here. And sometimes this layer can get buried if you have several other layers turned on. So you can click and drag this all the way to the top if you have several other layers on, and it'll just basically put that on top of everything else. Yeah, I think I struggle with that too, Paul. Knowing what's under what. There's many layers, which can be a good thing, but can be challenging. So with that said, we have 15 minutes left. There was an exercise component with answering these questions. Because we are running out of time, I'm going to ask Kara just to go through the answers to these questions quickly before jumping into the endangered and threatened species component. We likely will not have time to do the exercise 3, but feel free to do that in your own time. And with that, I will let you take it away, Kara.
All right. So for review, which layers in the LRM permit planning tool indicate support for fish and shellfish habitat? So one of the most important layers is our National Wetlands Inventory. It will show the presence of wetlands that may provide food, shelter, and breeding areas. And also tells you the type of wetland that you could expect there, such as marshes or tidal flats, which are especially valuable for aquatic life. The Wildlife Action Plan is another great layer. Within that layer, the wildlife riparian corridors can indicate where fish and other aquatic species move and live, as well as if you turn on that fisheries layer, you can look for specific types of fish. Not all inclusive, but there are important fish species on there. All right, so number 2, how can you assess the quality of habitat for fish and shellfish? So what we can look at is the wetland type and condition. Large, connected, and undisturbed wetlands are usually better for fish and shellfish, especially connected ones where the fish can move around freely. Water quality is really important. Clean water is essential, especially for drinking. Layers like impaired waters in the LRM tool can show if pollution might be a problem and be a detriment to species. The connectivity of systems, the fish need to be able to move between habitats. The corridors and connected waterways, like those shown in the Wildlife Action Plan layer, are a good indication that you'll probably see fish species present and shellfish as well. And then ecological integrity. This means how natural and healthy the area is. The New Hampshire Method and Wildlife Action Plan maps help evaluate the ecological integrity of different habitats. Okay, and do you expect the habitat at Lock Road to support fish and shellfish habitat? Why or why not?
So let's put this one to the chat. What do you all think?
We have a yes, great diversity of habitat, and another yes.
But why?
Diversity is a good reason.
What else?
Is there a certain section of Lock Road we might see more fish than a different section of Lock Road? Lindley says fish yes, shellfish question mark. That's a good answer. Shellfish questionable. And then floodplains, wetlands, and forest. So here, because we have a couple systems with surface waters, so connectivity to the other water course is a good reason. So we have the Merrimack River, that is a large permanent water body. When we turned on the fish mapping layers and the wildlife action plan layer with the fisheries, there were fish species that were found in that system. You can also expect to probably see smaller fish species within the scrub shrub wetland, especially if there's connection to the Merrimack River. With the impairments, it is important to consider certain species will be more prone to water impairments than others. Shellfish are especially sensitive to them because they're filter feeders, so they're going to take in any contaminants in the water column. So in terms of habitat, it's going to depend on the specific location along the road. So it has wetlands and surface waters, which are suitable for fish and shellfish. The wetland types layer shows marshes, tidal flats, and vegetated shallows. And that's a good, if it shows those, it's a good sign that there's probably fish and shellfish habitat there. If the impaired waters layer shows pollution or degradation, that can reduce the habitat quality, but maybe not make it so that there's no species found there. It may just be the more sensitive species won't be present. But that depends on the level of contamination as well. All right, so we're going to jump into threatened and endangered species. So we're going to use similar tools to evaluate these. So threatened and endangered species are protected under several different laws. So the Federal Endangered Species Act, the State Endangered Species Conservation Act, and the New Hampshire Native Plant Protection Act, which state no activity shall jeopardize the continued existence of a threatened or endangered species, a species proposed for listing as threatened or endangered, or designated or proposed critical habitat under those laws. So what makes a good habitat for threatened and endangered species? High ecological integrity is one of them. That is what is based, the wildlife action plan layers are based off of, is high ecological integrity. Terrestrial and riparian corridors are important, especially in New Hampshire. A lot of our threatened and endangered species are amphibians and turtles and snakes. Breeding and rearing sites are really important. If you don't have breeding and rearing opportunities on site, then you're not going to have populations that will be successful. Space for individual and population growth and normal behavior, and habitats that are protected from disturbances or are representative of the historical, geographical, and ecological distributions of a species. So you would expect to see threatened and endangered species where they had been previously found before. So one of the tools we can use for threatened and endangered species is the Stream Crossing Data and Initiative Data Viewer, which is also a really long title. So this one specifically, we talked about a little bit with the culverts and fish passage. So you can turn on the layer for species of concern and the wildlife action plan layers, and it will show you areas where those species of concern are found. So if you notice in that lower left-hand corner, the Merrimack River does have a species of concern listed in there. So the other one that you can use for determining threatened and endangered species presence is the fish survey map. This one, again, is done through the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department through their electrofishing surveys. This one is really great for localized viewing and for specific fish that you're looking for. So, you know, say that you are looking for Concord. You can zoom in and see all of the data points within Concord, or you can zoom to a specific species and look for where those were found throughout the state. So here we're looking at American brook lamprey, which is an endangered species. It's only found in the Oyster River watershed. And I actually was able to participate in some of these e-fishing activities, and we did catch one of these, which was pretty cool. And so this is also showing those red data points. When you click on those data points, it will show you the presence or absence of those species in that system on that day. And so you can see the American brook lamprey was found on this day at this sampling point. And if there's any others found at that location on that day, it will be listed there as well. This one is a little bit more intuitive to use. You have to know which fish are threatened or endangered because they're not categorized. But if you click on each profile, it does give you a little blurb of their population. So it will tell you if it's threatened or endangered or a species of concern.
All right, we are running out of time. We have one final exercise, but I think we're going to skip it so that we can give you all the opportunity to ask questions. But just so that you are aware of the exercise that has been placed into the chat, it does take you to one of those other data GIS tools that you can utilize. Again, it's on the very last page. We made reference to it earlier, but you can check if there's a species of concern in the layer. So there's on page, sorry, excuse me. On page 9, or I'm sorry, the page 10 of this PDF document, you can click this hyperlink here and you can play around with this GIS tool. You'll find that in the right-hand side of the tool, there is a layer. And once you scroll down, you'll see an option for species of concern. You can check there. There was another individual who put in the chat earlier asking about data check. That is an option. You can click the link that Barbara provided for the data check to see if there's data there. We had another question from Nancy. She said, a more global question sparked by the planning tool, if there's time. What role, if any, do conservation commissions have when wetlands delineation in the field is in question? And it looks like Barbara answered that. She stated you can ask for a third party to do another delineation. You will need to have this in a wetlands ordinance as an option to make sure the commission can hire a third party. So great questions. I've seen a lot of interaction in the chat here today. I love when we get questions like this. Lindley asked, how does catastrophic flooding affect species diversification? Kara, did you want to take this one?
Sure, yeah. So this is dependent on the species. Flooding is obviously going to destroy a lot of the habitat and food sources that are available. So in terms of flooding, fish are probably more likely to fare okay in catastrophic flooding, assuming that they don't get left on an upland area after the flood recedes. Birds will probably do okay and find another habitat. But our stationary species would have a tougher time. So our shellfish, amphibians, turtles that don't move very far, they would have a harder time dealing with a flood event that was catastrophic to the habitat, especially where turtles cross the road and there's lots of roadways and they're not very fast. That could be catastrophic for specific species.
Thanks, Kara. Any other questions before we leave for today?
Yeah, I'm back again. Yeah, I live in Ackworth, New Hampshire, and we've had a lot of catastrophic flooding. How do the fish survive when there's such an incredible turbidity throughout the entire stream? I've noticed, that an incredible decrease in the number of fish in the Cold River and its tributaries over the last couple decades. So that's why I asked that question. And is there any effort to repopulate fish in an area that has been affected?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest effect on fish for turbidity in a system is their eggs. So the eggs need oxygen to survive. And when there's really turbid water, it's going to cover those eggs with sediment and they won't get the oxygen they need to survive and create the next generation of fish. And that can actually cause a lot of population problems, especially in fish. They tend to release a lot of eggs. Some of them only spawn once and then they die. So it's water quality is really important for that reason. And then there are fish where in their adult stage, they're very sensitive to turbidity. Smaller fish like black-nosed dace, for example, They need clean water, less turbid water to just provide functions. The smaller fish in general, because of they're so much smaller, their gills will get sediment
Right.
stuck in them and they can't respirate properly. So Fish and Game does have quite a bit of stocking programs going on. They do eastern brook trout. They do Atlantic salmon stocking. There's lots of different species that they have projects for conserving and reboosting their populations.
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I noticed there were tons of dace in the Cold River. Now you rarely see them at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to mention the issue, I think the problem with the Mac is that you have to install a virtual PC on your Mac in order to see the any ArcGIS programs. So in the future, you might want to, I just did that. You might want to suggest to people who have a Mac or you know, that if you don't have a virtual PC on your computer, you should think about installing one.
That's great. I'll take a look into that, and then for our next next online program, we'll see if
Okay.
we can provide more information for that. But now we're at the 1:30 mark, so I want to thank everybody for attending. We had a great group again today. Thank you so much to Kara and Emma for their time, their expertise. It's really a great tool, and I know it can seem kind of overwhelming because there's so many layers. But I definitely encourage you to take a look at maybe some areas in your neighborhood so you can kind of get a feel for what it looks like on the ground, because you can actually visualize what's on the ground and then connect it to those mappers, and maybe just take one layer at a time to go through. For the purposes of this exercise, we wanted to show you all the opportunities out there, but you don't need to have every layer on all the time to try and figure out how to decode that property that you're looking at. So just take your time and do one, maybe resource at a time, or just do the National Wetlands Inventory. Just fool around with that one for a while until you feel like you're comfortable with it. And just also a couple quick updates. Again, I'll be sending out the recording to this program later today, along with the link to the field study program at Lock Road in Concord. If you do have any other questions, I will connect you with Kara and Emma to their emails as well. So you can always follow up with them directly. And again, thank you all for joining us. Have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you next Friday at Lock Road. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.